You're listening to a not so regular episode of Give Yourself Some Leeway with me, your host, Eugene Lee. I can say that this week did not go as planned. My planning for this week's episode, it got tough. Between jet lag, flight cancellations, and still trying to figure a way to fly back home, I could easily say, oh, this week's episode, I'll put that on the shelf and come back next week. But consistency means more to me in the long run. So this week I want to share something that I say a lot to get through these times when the going gets tough. It's something that has become almost a personal philosophy for me. And it's that stress and anxiety live in the space between your expectations and your reality. Let's go through that again slowly. The space between your expectations and your reality. Think about the last time you felt stressed, really anxious about something, whatever's going on, felt overwhelmed. I'd be willing to bet that somewhere in that moment, there was a gap between what you expected your week to look like and what actually happened. Between the habits that you planned to keep and the ones that fell apart by Tuesday. There's a gap, and that's where your suffering lives. Not in how hard the week was itself, but in the distance between what you thought it should be and what actually happened. So today I want to talk about one of the most practical neuroscience-backed tools that I know for closing that expectation gap. It's not by lowering your standards, and it's not by giving up on your goals. But you can be smarter and kinder about how you keep moving toward your goals, even when the going gets tough. So let's get into that today. Let's start by painting a picture. We'll start the story with a Wednesday morning. And you started off the week with a really good plan. A solid plan for how you want to see your week to go. So you work out Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You have that online course that you booked like 6 months ago, and you just want to get around to it. Well, that's going to happen this week. This week for sure, I'm going to finish that online course. And Monday was fine. You got your workout dialed in. Next thing, something happens on Tuesday. You have a difficult conversation or a bad night's sleep. Or you get a piece of news that just knocked you sideways. And now it's Wednesday morning and you feel off. You feel flat. Not sick, not devastated. You just feel like bleh. You have this low energy and everything just feels harder than it should be. And here's the moment that matters. It's in this moment that most people do one of two things. So the first group would push through. They just white knuckle through it. They just force the workout. They just, whatever will get me through this week, whether it's caffeine or any other way of compensating, just to get through the week. And what happens is they leave themselves so exhausted by the end of the week that they say, no, this was too intense for me. And they just call it quits. Option 2 is the person that cancels everything. They just go, I'm not feeling it today. I'll start fresh next Monday. And then that habit that they were trying to instill quietly dies. Neither option is really the answer. There is a third way to solidify your goals. And it comes from the brilliant mind of James Clear. I've mentioned James Clear time and time again on this podcast, the author of Atomic Habits. He says that if you stick to the schedule but lower the scope. So before we unpack that, let's go back to the expectation gap I mentioned earlier, because I think that this is the root of so much suffering for high achievers. Because we set the plans, we're good, ambitious, sometimes audacious, but they're well-intentioned plans. And then we expect those plans to feel the same way every single day. We expect to have the same peak motivation that we had in making those plans, even if we have a hard week. We expect our habits to come easy because they are so well intentioned, because we've been told that good habits eventually become automatic. And when they don't feel easy, we decide that there must be something wrong with the habit, with our discipline, with us. But here's what I know from behavioral science and from watching other high performers up close. It's that the expectation is that we should always feel, it should always feel easy that the habit comes to us, that if it doesn't come easy, then the habit that we're trying to instill is the problem. That discomfort is not a sign that something has gone wrong. That discomfort that we feel is the training. It's the gap between what feels familiar and what is new, what our brain is trying to adapt to. The highest performers are not people who find this easy. They're the people who have trained themselves to perform, to act in spite of the difficulty, in spite of that discomfort. To feel that to feel that discomfort and still move forward anyway. It's not about being perfect. It's not about always having a full intensity, but having some forward action, even if it's 1% or 0.1%. That forward action, that consistency over time, that is the distinction between those who achieve their goals and those who give up too early. So this is what happens in your brain when you're trying to build a new habit. You literally are trying to build new neural pathways. So when you're trying to instill something new, you've got these neurons in your brain and they're firing together and wiring together. Slowly, over time, through lots and lots of repetitions. And this is the key thing about these pathways. They don't care about the intensity of the repetition. They care more about the consistency over time. The more repetitions over time, not about putting in long hours all in 1 week and then doing nothing for the next 6 months, rather than doing 5 minutes a day over a 6-month period. And let me break it down. If you were to work out for 45 minutes and only do that once a week versus doing a 10-minute workout or 10-minute walk every day for the same period of time, you are more likely to stick to the habit of activity of the walking every day versus the one 45-minute workout per week. When you're not consistent, it's difficult for your brain to associate that habit with your identity. So your brain loves safety. Your brain loves predictability. It's something that I find so fascinating. Your brain's number one job is not to make you happy. It's not to make you successful. Your brain is constantly trying to make you safe. That is how we evolved. Our brain always tries to bring us back to safety. And the way that it keeps you safe is by predicting what comes next. It seeks out familiarity. It seeks out certainty. Because predictability equals safety to your nervous system. Chaos and uncertainty is seen as a threat. So that's why when we build habit streaks, it feels so good. Not because of pride in ourselves or building momentum, but because your brain genuinely relaxes into the rhythm of this consistent habit. So if you have a routine that you do every Wednesday, your brain says, we do this on Wednesdays. Wednesday is a workout day. I know what's coming. Wednesday, workout, I feel safe. And when you break that pattern, even if it's for a good reason, or when the going gets tough, your brain registers that as an inconsistency, as an unpredictability. And then that pathway weakens just a little bit. And then the resistance to going back and doing that workout on Wednesdays gets that little bit more difficult. Now, if you miss once, it makes missing twice so much easier. And the more you miss, the more resistant your brain will be to build up that habit of working out on Wednesday again. It's not a character flaw. It is neuroscience. And understanding that changes everything. How you see how your brain works versus what is in your control, your discipline. Because it means that showing up, even if it's in a reduced capacity, it's not about your discipline, it's about protecting the pattern that your brain has started to trust. So as James Clear said about keeping your schedule but lowering the scope, what does lowering the scope actually look like? So this is where it gets a little bit more practical. So lowering the scope means that you keep that commitment, but you adjust the intensity to match your current capacity. It's not about giving up. It's not about lowering your standards. It's about being honest about what you have available to you today and choosing the version of that habit that your current self can actually execute. For some days, that can be a leap. For some days, you can do that full intensity workout. For some days, you can do cold outreach to 1,000 people. On other days, you can't fit in that hour to work out. Maybe it's just walking for 10 minutes. Instead of doing 1,000 cold outreaches, you do one call. Or you follow up with that one person by email. If you have that online course you want to finish this week, maybe you just open the course and do one video or one module. It all depends on your capacity, but either way, showing up is what matters. Showing up is what counts. Both high intensity and low intensity fire the pathway. It's much better than skipping. They both tell your brain that this is who I am. I show up, even on the hard days, even when it's small, even when the going gets tough, I show up, even in a small way. That message repeated over and over weeks and months and years, that builds something extraordinary. It's not just about building a habit, but building what becomes your identity. I am someone who keeps on going, even when it gets hard, even when it's something small that gets in the way, and even when the going gets tough, I keep on going. This is what I really want you to hear. The goal is not about feeling motivated every day. I love it when people say, I'll just wait until I feel a bit more motivated to get these things done. Relying on motivation is like relying on the weather. And for me, growing up in Ireland, and Basel is a bit more predictable than Ireland, but you cannot depend on the weather. And if you're going to depend on the motivation like the weather, then always be prepared for low motivation. The goal is to build a relationship with your habits that does not depend on the weather, that does not depend on having high motivation every time. Become the one that shows up in the rain when you feel bleh, when you feel like I just don't have the energy or the willpower to do this. Don't wait for the willpower. Do the habit anyway. It's when everything feels harder than it should, just show up, be present. Just do the low intensity that meets your current capacity. Choosing that 10-minute walk over the hour workout. Maybe it's opening your laptop and doing 20 minutes of following up with people, or logging onto that online course and doing that small, maybe 2 videos or module of that course in whatever time you have. It's this small, consistent, relentless work of doing what you've been dreading to do for so long, even when you don't have the energy to do it, but just putting in that small bit of effort. It does not have to be perfect. I don't have my podcast set up and I'm just recording this on my phone. It does not have to be perfect. Showing up for others, like I do on the podcast, showing up for others is what matters. So does it need to be on my podcast setup? This is what elite performance really looks like on the inside. It's not all the flashy highlight reel you see on Instagram. It's not the ice water face routines you see. It's about small, consistent effort over time. The Wednesday morning where you feel blah. Wrapping this up, this is your practice for the week. I want you to do one thing. And it's what I like to call the scaled habit menu. And it's about defining those habits that, even in those days when you have low energy, you have what you consider the meal option versus the snack option. If you don't have time to sit down for a full meal and you need to keep on going, you need to have the capacity and energy to keep going, you might need to choose the snack option for that goal to feed into it. So take 3 habits that you're trying to build that are for your health and wellness, your confidence, your performance right now. What are 3 things you're currently working on? If you were to choose a big version, a meal version of that habit, and a snack version of that habit, what would that look like? So you have the full version. For instance, you have your workout that takes 60 minutes. And then you have your snack version, which could be a 10-minute walk. And that 10-minute walk is the non-negotiable that you could do any day. You could do that every day of the week, non-negotiable, if you don't have the capacity to do your 3 days of working out every week. If you work out on Monday and you don't have the energy on Wednesday, do your 10-minute walk. That's the bare minimum that you can do. That's the lowered scope version. And when you have the snack option on this meal, on this menu for yourself, you don't have that decision fatigue or that guilt, that narrative that's going to eat you up negotiating about whether or not you show up. You know that you have the meal. If I don't have the capacity for the full meal right now, then I do have the capacity for the snack version. What's the minimum I can do in order to move forward on these goals? Rather than reaching out to 100 people, it's reaching out to one, or following up with one person that I was meant to follow up with this week. Do that version. Do the smaller version. It's without guilt, without any apology. It's showing up with self-compassion for yourself. This is the fundamentals of Give Yourself Some Leeway. When the going gets tough, it's not about beating yourself up. It's about taking a step back, taking a breath, and giving yourself that space, giving yourself that leeway to show up with compassion and figure out a path forward. I do want to close with, this is very personal for me, because there were times with the podcast where I did not show up at my best, where life threw me a curveball and I just stepped away from the podcast for a few months. And that for me, for a while, was very tough, because it was not in alignment with how I wanted to show up for Give Yourself Some Leeway. And I got restless about that. Was I showing up in my full capacity? And rather than showing up here, I was showing up on what was my snack option, which was over on Noom Vibe, and doing daily questions and doing live talks and the like. And for a while, it was difficult to try and keep that habit up. But it helped me to stay consistent with the habit of communicating with others and speaking up about how I felt about burnout, high performance, workplace culture, and how to stay consistent as a high achiever. It's not just something I teach, it's something that I use for myself. On the weeks when I don't have the energy or I feel like I'm falling behind, there's that expectation gap between what I want to achieve and what actually happens. What I feel I can manage and what feels outside of my control. I come back to this framework. What's the lowered scope version of the podcast that I can use for today? And that's where I show up on Noom Vibe and answer a few people's questions and show up in whatever capacity I can. It's never, should I just give up on this? Oh, you broke your streak. What does that say about my discipline? What does that say about me? It's more about showing up and asking, what's the version of me that can show up right now? What's the version of me and what can I do about that right now? Can I do it? Do I have the capacity to show up and do that lowered scope version? Almost always that answer is a yes. Almost always doing that small thing opens the door. It makes it easier. It breaks down the resistance of getting back on track. It's not always about doing the full session. It's not always about having peak motivation to do so. The quiet proof in the person that I want to become is by being the person who still shows up, even when the going gets hard. That proof to myself compounds over time, week after week, month after month. This is who I am. I am the kind of person who keeps on going. So next time that you have a blah Wednesday or life finds a way to get in the way, I mean this with everything I have, especially right now. Please don't cancel on yourself. Don't give up on yourself. Don't give up on your goals. Just lower the scope. Show up in some small way. Fire that neural pathway. Keep that pattern. Because the gap between your expectations of yourself and your reality, it's not in those perfect weeks where everything goes well and everything goes as you planned. It's what happens in the shadows. It's what happens, the work that no one else sees. That imperfect work that you showed up for anyway. That is the long game. And you're already playing it better than you think. If you're tuning in, you're already playing it better than you think. You're aware. Until next time, thank you again for listening. If you made it this far, if you made it 27 minutes in, thank you so much for listening. I really hope that this rings a bell for you, that it resonates. Until next week, take care.